Shalom, shalom, shalom to the 12 tribes of Israel that have been scattered worldwide, all my father's children, according to the Holy Manuscript. Amori Yoshiyahu ben Dawid of the ARK, and we have been studying over the last several weeks now the topic or the subject of the covenants. We discovered in our studies that there are more than one covenant, that we have several covenants in the Bible. And we have mentioned some of the major covenants in our studies, beginning with the study of the covenant with Adam. And of course, we're concluding with our covenant in Hamashiach. When we saw these covenants, we noticed through our study that each of the covenants build on the previous covenant, and how each of the covenants are to a particular group of people. And we mentioned the fact that with Adam, it was for everybody. And then the Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, his descendants. And then we went on with that, how it narrows down with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then from Jacob, it goes to the 12 tribes. And from the 12 tribes of Israel is when we receive what's called the written Torah, where we got all of the laws, the statutes, and the commandments that Abba Yah, it was given to the house of Israel. And that's very important. From that particular covenant, inside of that covenant, we got what was called, I'm talking about the what they call the Mosaic covenant. We got what was called the Aaronic covenant, and that was Yah's relationship to Aaron as high priest and the Levitical priesthood. Tonight, I want to elaborate on the Davidic covenant, because that is also in what's called the Old Testament. If you want to use that term, again, it would be called the Old Covenant, but it is part of the covenant. So the Davidic covenant is very important, and I mentioned this on the Shabbat because the Davidic covenant definitely speaks to not only David and his descendants, but for sure it also includes the house of Judah, and it also points to ultimately our King of Kings and Master of Masters, Yahushua HaMashiach. So as we look at the covenants, we see what people call the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And I want to just bring out something Hebraically about all the covenants. All of the covenants that were made with Yah and us were made, what they say, with a blood sacrifice. And that's why they are called a blood covenant. And what is very interesting about every covenant is that you had something in the middle. So you have Adam on this side, then you have Yah on this side, and there is something going on, right, between Adam and Yah. And what ends up happening is that something comes in the middle, and that whatever that thing is in the middle is slain, so that one party of the covenant does not have to necessarily kill the other party, right? So when we look at Noah, the same thing. We know Noah offers a sacrifice, and then there's a token of the covenant, which is the blood. We already studied that Abraham did the same exact thing, except he had several animals split down the middle. So you had something in the middle. You had one side Yah, the other side Abraham. And they were going to walk down the middle of the pieces to signify or to swear to a higher power. And of course, the Bible says because Yah could not swear by any higher power than himself, then he swore by himself. In other words, Abraham, our father Abraham, didn't go through that thing that was in the middle that died and the blood was shed. So Yah went through it for Abraham, our grandfather. And then, of course, we studied about Isaac and the covenant, same thing with the sacrifice. And then we saw the ratification of the covenant in, once again, in Jacob. And I spent a lot of messages on that one. And most of you all have seen those where Jacob receives the covenant from Yah, the promises of Yah. And, of course, the covenants with Abraham and Isaac are renewed in Jacob. And then it is now given to his 12 sons. At the time, he had no children, but eventually, of course, we know he's going to have 12 children, and they're going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. From there, we see, of course, Noah and the most famous picture of a something in the middle. And, of course, that is the lamb. Again, we see the lamb slain. So we have Yah on one side, something in the middle, and then you have the people on the other side. So you have Yah, something in the middle that must die, and then you have the people on the other side. And of course, that lamb is slain and becomes what they call the Passover lamb. Okay, and then of course, we see the covenant then given to the people in the promised land. Not in the promised land, in the wilderness on the way to the promised land. All right. And when they make it to the promised land, or they get into Israel, eventually Yah makes another covenant, and he's going to make it with the house of David. And we studied that on Shabbat. And I showed you all how Yah chose to go into covenant with David. And it was very interesting that there was a sacrifice involved before the covenant was made with the house of Jesse and with David, and of course David's descendants. So then then we get a picture then every time we see the covenant, we see, I'm talking about now between Yah and us. Every time we see a covenant, we see mankind, something in the middle, and which is and then Yah. Man, something in the middle, and then Yah. So Yah makes a statement or produces what's called his agreement with the people. Man is on one side, he's on the other side, and then something in the middle dies. So whatever it is that's put in the middle right there in the covenant is what they call the ratifier, or the thing that makes the covenant true, or makes the covenant solid, or makes the covenant meaningful, or makes the covenant sure. So without the blood of the covenant, then there is no way to properly enforce the terms of the covenant. So the covenant then is made in blood to show how serious it is, how grave it is, and how important it is, and how serious the consequences are for breaking it in each case. So when we come to what's called the New Testament, people say, oh yeah, there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. And as I mentioned earlier, there is really not a New Testament. First of all, the word testament is an outdated word. Most of the modern translations today, and I'm going to show you the scripture in a moment, we're going to get to the book of Hebrews, will admit that that word for testament should be covenant when you see it, because Hamashiach uses the word. When he's going to literally say, this is the new covenant, in my blood. So we see man on one side, Yah on the other side, and something in the middle that must die. That concept of why this thing in the middle must die, right? It is to show you how important it is not to break this covenant. That's what it's about. Okay, so let's talk for the next few moments about the new covenant. Let's now talk about the new covenant. All right. Let me get this little article I picked up. I had you guys looking at this because it was easy and everybody can pull it down if they wanted to, straight out of Wikipedia. And I'm not using Wikipedia as some kind of specialized source. I'm just trying to show you that everybody knows about these covenants. It's out in the open and you can research it for yourself. But I want to show you something. First of all, where the new covenant concept comes from. The new covenant concept does not come from the new covenant. It comes from the old covenant, what they call the old covenant. Now let me put that in other terms. The New Testament concept of a New Testament. Does that make sense? The very thinking that there is a New Testament. Where did the New Testament come from? Did it come from what people think is the New Testament? So they go, oh, I'm looking at the New Testament because the New Testament is where the New Testament is. No, prove it. There is no such thing as a New Testament. The word is a renewed covenant. That's what it is. So the covenant, and we've seen it before, the covenant keeps getting renewed over and over and over and over and over again. That's what's happening. So let's say if you were Noah, you would be able to say the Noah covenant is a new covenant because it was what? Made even stronger after the flood and then given a rainbow. Whereas with the Adamic covenant, we didn't get a rainbow, right? Of course. And we could do the same thing with Abraham. And we could say that Abraham was the new covenant. Abraham's covenant was new from Noah, right? So what do we get in that covenant? We got more than one animal, different types of animals. We got the fire and the smoke, the light passing through. We didn't get that with Noah. We got we got the rainbow. And of course, we're going on. And each time you can see that the covenant is just being made, it's being renewed and strengthened, or renewed and something added. And each time there is something in the middle. So each time the covenant is renewed, notice that the thing that's in the middle becomes greater and greater. It becomes greater and greater. It becomes more and more. So that eventually we are in a covenant where bulls are brought. So we're not talking about, turtle doves and lambs. We went from a sheep to bulls, to multiple bulls, to calves, to red heifers, to lambs and rams and dirt. And of course, we see this blood being shed. And the question is, why? Why is all that? Because every time that happens, it's supposed to be a reminder that we are the ones that should die. And so there has to be what's called a mediator. And that thing in the middle has always been the mediator. All right, let's discover that before we even get too deep in this message, because I'm not going to make this too long tonight, because this is going to give you something to think about for sure. A mediator is a person. This is just a regular dictionary definition that anybody can just pull down offline. A mediator is a person who attempts to make people involved in a conflict come to an agreement. Did you hear that? That is what a mediator is. A mediator is, again, a person who attempts to make people involved in a conflict come to an agreement. So if that is a normal English definition of the word mediator, which means that this is someone in the middle, of a conflict. The thing in the middle of the person here in the middle of the conflict is to help the parties involved, the people involved, come to an agreement. Now, that definition of a mediator begins to make sense to us now when we read the Bible about Hamashiach. Let me show you. In the book of Hebrews, so of course, y'all call that in the New Covenant, the Brit Hadashah, I think that's how you say it in Hebrew. The book of Hebrews, chapter 9, he gets into that. Paul is talking to the people here about the role of Hamashiach. Watch this. He says, I'm just going to start at 11 for time. But Hamashiach, being come a high priest of good things to come, by greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer and the sprinkling of the unclean sanctifieth the purification of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Ruach offered himself without spot to Yah, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living For this cause, he is the mediator. He's what? He's the mediator. He's the go-between. You see that? So what makes the new covenant so powerful? What makes the new covenant so grand and awesome, but also so fearful, right? Is the fact that the mediator of it. Now let's bring that into context. When the covenant was established between Yah and Adam, and Eve was there, when that animal was killed, that animal and them watching the animal being killed was supposed to put an awe inside of them, like, oh my, whoa, this is serious business. And if I continue sinning like this, and these animals have to die, man, that is just cruel. And then you can do, and it's like, and so watching that had to have an effect on them psychologically, like, whoa, and we know that they continue to offer sacrifices because of Cain and Abel. Let's let's move forward. Abraham, our father, had to slay several beasts. Remember I said, between every covenant, Yah is calling Abraham, and Yah is on this side, Abraham's on this side, but he had to kill all those animals. Why? He had to watch him suffer. He had to watch him bleed. He had to watch him die. And by doing that, it was supposed to solidify the covenant in his heart. I was asking a question earlier, and I'm going to get the answer, I'm sure, later on. Why is it that Yah is requiring blood for that thing in the middle? Why did there have to be a blood sacrifice for that in the middle? And why certain blood is allowed and others is not? See, that goes into something way deeper, because you can't offer like reptilian blood. And I have my theory about it, and I'm going to talk to some people about this. But one of my theories is because people don't necessarily hold reptilian type blood in high regard. Cold-blooded, So as a mediator of a covenant, and say you kill a snake, right? And nobody really cares about snakes anyway. You want them all dead. So people don't, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm just making a point to where, like, we wouldn't think that as a big deal. Or even if we said, all right, the blood of insects are going to be our sacrifice. How come Yah's not using insect blood? Because, most of us can't stand flies. So if you put flies down there, it's like, okay, we'll kill these flies anyway. Or can't stand mosquitoes. So we're not using mosquito blood. So the thing in the middle is supposed to make you go, oh, I can't believe this. I can't believe that what I've done caused this thing right here to die. And so you go into Leviticus, obviously, and we get the picture of the thing in the middle, a lamb without spot or blemish, which means you have to literally look into your flock for the most perfect lamb, the one that you would keep, the one that would be the prized lamb. You have to look for that one, the most beautiful one, and set it apart for one purpose, for the blood to be the go-between, which should make you say, man, I gotta straighten up my life, because I don't want to keep doing this to these animals because they're precious. Unless, we can continue to talk about, the bullocks, or like they said, a red heifer, and that word red is brown. So like a brown or a ruddy cow, you have to bring it. And I think you guys are catching the point. And each time that would happen, the mediator was the animal. I want you to see it, the life. So the life killed was hopefully helping you agree with Yah. The life that was slain in the middle, the purpose of that as a mediator was an attempt by, and of course I'm talking symbolic. When Yah says to do this, that is an attempt for you to see a mediator dying to ratify the covenant or to resolve the conflict. So what's the conflict that needs resolving? That's a problem that's causing the death of these animals. What is the conflict between Yah and us? It's Isaiah chapter 1. The conflict is, Isaiah chapter 1 is a summation of it. And what is that? Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for Yahuwah have spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. He said, so there is need of a mediator now, because of the rebellion against me, that I've raised up children, rebelled against me. He says the ox know his owner. That means, obviously, a cow, an ox knows his owner, and the ass is master's crib. An ass knows where his actual home is, but Israel don't know. My people does not consider. So we see here there is a violation of a contract. The contract with Israel was the children of Israel would be Yah's, but the contract has been broken, so now the children of Israel don't even know that they're Yah's. Let's find out if it gets worse. Verse 4, all sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity. That means when you covered with iniquity. Seed of evildoers, it means generationally doing evil. Children that are corrupters, they have forsaken Yahuwah. Again, do you see it? They have forsaken Yahuwah. So now we see the conflict. If there's a conflict between two parties, then we need a mediator. We need a go-between. So they have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. So Yah is on one side. Israel, who doesn't know and they're not considering and they've gone completely evil, don't understand how important this covenant is that they keep breaking. They don't get it. They don't realize they're dealing with life and death. Watch this. Why should you be stricken anymore? Oh, I'm sorry. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backwards. Why should you be stricken anymore? He's like, well, I can't do anything else to you. It doesn't matter what I do to you. Once your heart and once you have become callous against the covenant, he's saying even punishment doesn't help. Watch. Why should you be stricken anymore? You will revolt. That means you will fight against me and my covenant more and more. And the question is, why would Israel do that? Why as a nation would we revolt against our own Abba Yah? He's going to tell us. He says, the whole head is sick. He's going to give a picture of the whole body. He's looking at Israel as a whole. Excuse me. He said, you have a sick head, number one. Number two, you have a weak heart. It's about to die, about to quit on you. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there's no soundness. That means you're weak. In it, but wounds, bruises, and putrefying sores. That means you're sick and decaying. They have not been closed up nor bound up. That's like leprosy. That means it is basically what you would consider to be an incurable disease that Israel has contracted. Neither mollified with ointment. And now watch what he's going to tell them, because this is a prophecy, right? Your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Land, the strangers devour it in your presence, and it's desolate, as overthrown by strangers. And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, as a lodge in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. Verse 9, except Yahuwah of hosts had left unto us a what kind of remnant? Very small. Very small. A very small remnant. We should have been as Sodom. And we know the story in the history of Sodom. And we should have been like unto Gomorrah. And we know what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. Utterly overthrown. Now, he's talking about his own people here. right? And then he says in verse 11, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me? Like, what's the point? Why would you keep bringing, sacrifices of sheep and goats and rams? You know what he's trying to say? You're messed up in your heart, in your mind, in your body, as a nation, as families, as individuals. We are in this situation right now as a nation. And we don't realize he's talking to us, but he is talking to us. Now watch what he says. He's talking to the nation again. He was like, boy, but you still going through the motions. And I'm full of it, of rams and the fat of fed beasts, and I do not delight not in the blood of the bullocks or lambs or of the goats. And when you come to appear before me, who has required it at your hand to tread my course? Like, how do you feel that because there's a requirement to the feast days that you can come to these feast days and still be jacked up as a person? He was like, I don't understand where y'all got that from. He says, and that you would tread my courts. Bring no more vain oblations. He was like, hey, y'all stop. And incense is an abomination. He's like, even because you're so messed up, what you bring is like, I can't do it. It's an abomination. The new moons and the Sabbath, the calling of the assemblies, he's like, now the nation is so messed up, I can't hear all that now. That's what he says. He said, the appointed feast my soul hated. They are trouble to me, and I'm weary to bear them. He like, it's almost impossible for me to get through these feast days because people are so wicked. Going through the motions. Now, that's not to say we're not supposed to keep the feast days because we're told to keep the feast. What he's saying is the nation is so sick and corrupt and evil and destitute. And he's at a point now where he's like, I can't do anything else to you because what else can be done? Everything has been taken. You don't have any land. You don't have your language. You don't have your last name. You don't have knowledge of who you are. You don't know where you are. And so he's talking to the nation and he's saying, your situation is hopeless. And when you spread forth your hands, I'll hide my eyes. You know how people get ready to pray and they put their hands up, and he said, I'm not even going to look. I'll hide my eyes from you. Yeah. And when you make many prayers, I ain't going to hear them because your hands are full of blood. Like, going to be praying, praying. You're like, I'm not listening to that. Because I can't listen to it when you have all this wickedness and evil in your heart, in your life, in your family, in your nation, in the world of Israelites. Remember, and believe it or not, Isaiah is preaching pre-captivity, right? But we'll get to that later. He says, verse 16, wash you. Yeah, how about that? Wash you. Wash yourself. You want to make everything so perfect and clean? How about you wash you? Make you clean. Verse 16, put away the evil of your doing from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do well. That's what he's telling us. You got to stop the evil and learn to do well. Seek judgment. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. Plead for the widow. He's like, come on, let's take our knowledge and understanding of what we know Torah teaches. Let's put it into practice. Now, I want you to see something here in verse 18. Come now. Let us reason together. wait, you just said you're not looking at us. You just said you're not going to hear us. You said you're not going to accept our prayers. You said that we can't offer up any sacrifices. But now you're saying let's reason together? Explain that to us. What do you mean reason together? How are we going to reason if you're not talking to us and we are rebellion against you? And the answer is going to be in this picture of a mediator. There's going to be a go-between. Watch this. Come now, let us reason together, saith Yahuwah. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. And though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. So that's a promise of a mediator. He was like, we're going to reason this out. Let's go back to the definition. A person who attempts to make people involved in a conflict come to an agreement, a go-between. He was like, we need to come to a go-between, a mediator. All right? And if you be willing and obedient, number one, you have to want to be back into the proper relationship with me as your father. And number two, you have to be willing to obey me, because that has always been the conditions of every covenant. Every covenant, starting with Adam to Noah, and of course, the promise was Noah and Ham, Shem, and Japheth, but then through Shem we get Abraham. Same thing. You got to obey me. Abraham, obey me. Isaac, you got to obey me. You got to be willing, humble yourself, obey me. Jacob, you got to obey me. The 12 tribes of Israel, you got to be willing, you got to humble yourself, you got to obey me. So here, the nation is told the exact same thing. You will eat the good of the land. That's the covenant. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured with the sword. For the mouth of Yahuwah has spoken it. He was like, you don't get with the covenant and the mediator and get it right, you're going to be killed, because that is what the mediator in every situation has done. In every situation, the mediator dies to ratify the covenant. So we have animals serving as a mediator, dying, hopefully, to get your attention so that you will humble yourself and be back in relationship with your Father and walk according to the laws, statutes, and commandments. Because when you sin, you have to see this animal, and hopefully those animals should deter you from sinning, should stop you from doing it. When you stop you from breaking the covenant every time you see one of these animals die. You should be like, you know what? And let me tell you what happened. We read it a little earlier. Paul says it didn't work with the animals, because the blood of bulls and goats and turtle dove and the sprinkling of blood and the red heifer sacrifices, after a while, people started seeing the mediator as nothing. Man, just an animal, just kill it, man, be done with it, right? Isaiah knew that too. One of the most, and I'm just doing this for time, one of the most popular verses in all of Isaiah is Isaiah 53. But a lot of people, when they read Isaiah 53, don't understand